What's up everybody, and welcome back to another synth video. Now, it's a beautiful summer night here in Canada, and what better thing to talk to you guys about than the amazing groove synthesis third wave. Now, I already did a full-length video on the third wave, which I urge you guys to check out if you haven't already, but in that video, I focused more on the third wave as a wavetable synthesizer and the power and versatility it has in that world. But what you might not know is that the third wave is actually an incredible virtual analog synth and arguably probably the best virtual analog synth on the market right now. So today I want to take a look at that other side of the groove synthesis third wave and show you guys how it seriously stacks up to my actual analog synthesizers in terms of the features, sound quality, and much more. Now, two quick things before we get started. I just independently released my sophomore EP, The Space Between Two Halves of a Heart. I'm really proud of it. I think it's the best music I've ever done, and there's tons of hardware analog synths all over it. It would mean the world to me if you took a moment to go check it out, stream it, save it, share it, whatever. The link is in the description, and thank you so much. Secondly, while I purchased the third wave with my own money and the first video was fully on my own accord, Groove Synthesis actually reached out after seeing that first video and asked me to do this second video, so big shout out to Groove Synthesis for sponsoring this video. Alright, let's get started. Now, hopefully that demo song showed you just how amazing the third wave can sound as a virtual analog synth. Every single synth sound you heard and every single effect you heard was coming from the third wave. The only thing I used externally was the drums, as you normally know I do, and the mixing and mastering in Logic. So a good place to start would be doing a comparison between the third wave and one of my favorite analog synths. I'm going to use the Prophet 6 for this part. Now, I've dialed up the patches as closely as possible, and let me know what you think. I was blown away by how amazingly close the third wave can sound to a real VCO analog poly like the Prophet. All right, now hopefully that goes to show just how amazing the third wave can sound in terms of being a competitor to an analog synth with analog oscillators. Now, there's a couple reasons for this, which we'll get into more in the walkthrough, but number one, the filters on the third wave are analog and they are amazing. They're the same filters from the Prophet 5 and Prophet 10, and they really sing, and they're fantastic for almost all kinds of analog synth sounds. Secondly, the third wave has what's called circuit drift, which is an amazing parameter we're going to get more into later. But if any of you guys know the sequential synths, it's kind of similar to what they've done with the vintage knob, and it really emulates the behavior of old analog vintage synths beautifully. Not a lot of other synths on the market that I'm aware of have this level of detail when it comes to emulating old analog circuitry, and it really shows with the third wave. All right, now for the part you've probably been waiting for. Let's jump onto the front panel of the third wave and listen to how good it sounds by itself and design some of our favorite style of analog patches. One quick note, I'm not going to be using any of the third wave's effects at all in these patches because I really think it's easy sometimes to hide behind good sounding effects, which the third wave has. So for the purpose of this demo, everything you're going to hear is going to be completely dry. Let's get started. All right, so we're going to start by initializing a patch here. So my number one tip is to set yourself up for success when making VA patches. So the initialized patch on the third wave is this pretty weird wavetable-y thing with a lot of stuff going on that we don't need. So what I would recommend doing is creating a starting point and then saving it as a patch. Next up, we're going to go to our miscellaneous knob here and go to circuit drift. This is like the vintage knob on the sequential stuff. And if you want to make good sounding VA patches, you absolutely need to use the circuit drift. So I find a sweet spot for this type of patch is at around 75 to 78. So let's do 78 here. There's a couple more things I want to do. So I'm going to take the velocity strength. This is optional, but I actually like to turn off velocity for these types of old analog synth patches. You can totally have it on if you like velocity, but a lot of really classic vintage synths like the Prophet 5, Mini Moog, all those did not have velocity back in the day. So I find you can totally get great sounding analog patches without velocity, and sometimes they sound more authentic. A couple final things. We'll turn off the compressor here, and then we're going to go into our filter, and we're going to go into miscellaneous and turn off resonance compensation. Now the reason for that is typically with resonance compensation on, the third wave does this really cool thing where as you bring up resonance on the filter, the bass stays the same. But again, a lot of classic vintage filters like the Moog ladder filter, the Prophet 5 filter, they don't do this. So we're turning off resonance comp to get that authentic vintage analog sound. So now we see we can use that resonance knob as an EQ curve and really shape the sound. So here's our starting point. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as a patch. All right, so we've got our starting point, and let's go ahead and make some patches. So let's play with some other wave shapes. So that's our sawtooth. It's absolutely classic. We can do wave offsetting to change the shape of it. I personally don't use wave offset too much on the sawtooth, but we have a square wave, and this is where we would use pulse width modulation, which sounds great. Really sounds rich and lush, and again, that circuit drift makes a huge difference here. It's really doing a lot of the heavy lifting, as well as of course the amazing filter. So this is a great place to do our first sound, and it's going to be dead simple. So we're going to do pulse width modulation chords going through a nice filter, and it's been used on virtually every single synth song, at least somewhere as well too. So classic sound. So we'll turn up our release a little bit here. And we'll jump into our LFO section here. So LFO 1, actually I'm going to use LFO 2 for this and you'll see why later. So LFO 1, we're going to go ahead and modulate the pulse width modulation. There's going to be a separate knob here. So pulse width modulation 1, which is great. And let's hear how it sounds. Now, pulse width modulation is one of the few mod destinations where I'm going to be basically going overboard with it because I love how it sounds. I know typically when I design sounds for you guys, I'm like, go subtle with modulation, but with pulse width modulation, you can go crazy. I'm going to turn the frequency down here. Turn the release down a little bit. Now, to my ears, that sounds amazing already. It sounds really analog and lush, but we're not done. We've got this amazing filter. So, if you didn't want a very resonant sound, we could literally just turn down the filter here. But we're going to turn up resonance. And you'll notice, because we turned off that resonance compensation, the bass will really drop out. But that's actually okay, because that's one of the hidden tricks of vintage analog synth programming is a lot of the time you want that bass drop off in a polysynth anyway, because you don't want your polysynth to be super bassy and take up a million miles in the mix. And we can bring some of that body back with our saturation knob. Listen to that. Sounds super lush to me. I love the way these filters sound. So let's go ahead and modulate the filter with the envelope. Now, by default, it's going to be doing a very plucky sound, but we don't want that. We want a very gentle, brassy sound with not too much envelope amount. That sounds pretty good. We're going to tweak. A lot of getting these simple sounds sounding just really great is all about just how much time you want to spend tweaking them. I can mess with the cutoff, the resonance, the saturation, the envelope amount, and really go as far as I can to get it sounding great. Awesome. That is sounding absolutely beautiful to me. Now, the next trick I'm going to show you with this sound, and it's one we're going to use on pretty much every patch because I think it's one of the absolute biggest strengths of the third wave for virtual analog programming, is we're going to do a double of this patch. So we do that by clicking part 2, and now we hear that good old initialized patch playing over top, but we're just going to simply copy from part 1 to part 2. Just like this, copy. Now we have our two parts playing together. Now that is just simply beautiful. Now, if you want more of like a Prophet 10, Prophet 5, Jupiter style layered sound where it's just right down the middle, then you're gonna go ahead and leave it like this. And you can do little things like slightly detune one of them. But for me, I personally really love doing the classic thing, which you've probably heard if you've seen my Oberheim OBX8 video, and you've definitely heard it in countless tracks, which is panning one to the left and one to the right and listening to how amazing this sounds. There we go, right there. Beautiful sounding stereo binaural patch. And what's so cool is that, again, we're just doing a simple patch right now. We're using one oscillator with some pulse width modulation going to the filter. This is as simple as it can get. It just sounds great. Let's duplicate the patch one more time and do the same thing. And then this time we'll have one going straight down the middle. So we'll copy from part 1 to part 3. And then this time with part 3, we'll detune it a little bit to the other side. I should probably fix the panning there. So part 3 is going to be right in the middle there. All right, let's go. I don't know about you guys, but for me, that gives any analog synth I own a run for its money. Just absolutely breathtakingly beautiful sound with incredible stereo width, detail, natural life. It's just amazing. And again, to remind you guys, other than the demo tracks, every single sound we're designing and every single sound demo you're hearing is completely dry. We're just highlighting the quality of the synth. All right, so we're back at our starting point here. So let's go ahead and make a really fat sounding analog style bass, kind of like a mini Moog style bass for our next track. So for this one, we're going to use our unison mode. So we're going to go ahead and click unison, and we're with it. We have a whole bunch of options. So you can choose the key assign here and kind of how the notes will trigger. I prefer to go for last no retrigger because I just want to have that sort of legato fluidity when I'm playing. Now what's really cool here is we can stack our voices. We could do like a crazy drum and bass re-space style sound. But so that's 24 voices playing, which is huge, but that's not very like authentically analog. So we're actually going to really limit the amount of power we're using for now and just use one voice, which sounds pretty funny. We have 24 voices, we're using one voice in unison. But that's kind of like one of the golden rules of sound design is sometimes less is more, and especially with a synth like this where gain staging is so important, we're going to be able to crank this one voice really loud because it's just the only thing playing. So let's go ahead and we'll bring in our other oscillators. So we've got our 3 oscillator kind of mono synth sound that you would expect from a Moog. Beautiful, right? So already that's a great sounding lead. Like if we wanted to, give it a little bit of release. But we are here for a bass. So let's go ahead and we're gonna go ahead and drop these down an octave each. So. And then we're going to leave the last one up an octave. So we're getting this fat re-space sort of analog mini Moog style pad bass sound. Sounds absolutely massive to me. So here we're going to go ahead and play with the saturation, and it's all about getting the mix just right because you go too far and it sounds amazing. But we also want to make sure we're getting the resonance there so we can hear the resonance. Because there with full saturation, you can't really hear the resonance too much as we turn it down. So this already sounds amazing, but just watch as we bring in the analog saturation. And remember, because we're only using one of the 24 voices, we can really juice this voice up and get a really analog and fat sounding authentic bass sound. As we bring in the resonance and bring down the filter, oh my gosh. Immediately I could use this bass in any miles away track and it would just sound fantastic. Like, again, I don't know what they've done with the vintage knob, the circuit drift and the digital oscillators, the way they're done, but those going into this analog circuitry of the Prophet 5 filter and then this beautiful saturation just sounds incredible to me. Easily the most convincing virtual analog synth I've heard. All right, so that was a simple one. Let's go back and create another sound. Again, all of these sounds are pretty simple compared to the wavetable stuff you were hearing me do before, but that's the beauty of virtual analog is it doesn't need to be complex, it just needs to sound good, and the third wave absolutely does. So this is gonna be a classic super saw style, big, epic chord patch, the kind you guys hear me always make on my Prophets and my Oberheims. So again, we'll start off with our saw wave from our basic initialized start. And you guys can see why it's so quick doing this and having kind of a starting place every time. So let's go ahead and bring in our 3 oscillators, and we'll leave the volume of the oscillators a little bit lower here because we want to gain stage it properly since there's going to be so much going on sonically. So then we're going to detune a little bit for everything. Let's go ahead. Beautiful, already really lush. Let's go ahead and bring up our resonance pretty high. Our saturation. Now that's already sounding awesome with the saturation and the cutoff. My one bit of feedback that I have talked to Groove Synthesis about, and they are working on, is I would love the oscillators to be free running, or the ability to turn them into free running oscillators, because that would just get rid of that beginning attack where it sounds a little phasey at first. Again, you can't notice this when you turn down the filter, and you can't notice it when you start to layer sounds up, but that is something they've told me they're working on in a future firmware update, which is super cool because that's one of my favorite features for virtual analog synths, and it's great to know that it should be coming. So let's go ahead and we'll turn up our release. And then we're gonna use that detune trick from before. So let's go ahead and duplicate the pad. I told you we'd be using this trick a bunch, it's amazing. So let's copy to program 2 and pan 1 to the right and 1 to the left, and let's go. This is a perfect time to talk about one of my favorite features, which is that by just double clicking at the same time, we can edit all of the parameters at the exact same time for both patches. So if we want to just do some performance stuff here, tell me that isn't one of the best sounding saw pads you've ever heard in your life. This is a great place to show you guys the power of the filter. So if I crank the resonance, mind your ears, but that filter is beautiful, and it's one of the reasons why this synth just punches way above similar virtual analog style synths, because it's got the real deal for the filter. All right, I've got one more sound I'm going to show you guys, so let's reinitialize the patch. For this one, I'm going to show you guys the power of the split feature. We're going to do a multi-part analog patch to show you guys kind of what it would sound like to have a split patch where you have a bass on one side and then a lead on the other, like a Blade Runner style patch. I did a couple of these in my pack, but I'm showing you guys how you can make them yourselves. So we're going to start off right away by splitting the keyboard, and we do that by going into Mode, Split, right here. So we're going to add a couple of splits. Let's go ahead and remove this first one where they both play. And there we go. We've got part 1 is going to be up to C4, and part 2 will be everything above C4. So it's literally just that easy. So on part 1 to start, we're going to go ahead and put on unison. And this time we can play around a little bit. We can stack, we're not going to go crazy with, 15, 16 voices, but we'll stack a couple of voices here. We're going to bring them down an octave. We're making a pretty similar sound to the one you heard me make for the bass here. I love those types of sounds. Oh, too low here. Awesome. Then we're going to go ahead and bring down our cutoff. resonance up, saturation up. And this time, the only difference here is we're going to turn up the release. So we get kind of a long drone pad. And then we're going to turn up our envelope amount here. There we go. Turn up the detune a little bit. So that's our bass done right there, easy. So we're gonna go into our splits again, go to our next split here. So with this lead sound, it's pretty similar to what we've heard before. Again, like I said, these virtual analog sounds, they're all pretty straightforward. But what I am going to do is have one oscillator that's quite a bit louder than the others. That's going to be my lead oscillator, my main one. And the other two are going to be a little bit further behind with some detune. So let's go ahead and just quickly turn off velocity here. Again, you don't have to do this, but it's my preference. Turn on circuit drift since we're starting from scratch. And let's go ahead and change our envelope shape. A cool sound I like to use, or a cool feature rather I like to use on these kinds of leads is our keyboard tracking amounts. We really have a lot here, which will allow us to pretty much sculpt exactly how we want. So as we play higher on the keyboard, the filter will open up more. Turn down our release a little bit. This one I am going to add a little bit of stereo spread for, just halfway, because it does sound really nice on certain patches. And in this split patch, our bass will be in the mids and our lead will be on the side. So let's check it out. Now we're almost done, but we're gonna do something to really take both these patches home, which is add modulation on the pitch. Now that's a great technique to really make your sounds sound more vintage, more nostalgic. So we do that again, we click LFO here, and we're gonna go ahead and put on some warble. So I realized I didn't do that on my first patch, which is what I was hinting at. I always love using LFO1 for just general pitch, slow vibrato, and then I use the LFOs, the other LFOs for other stuff. So let's check it out. Sounds like this if we overdo it. But we're gonna turn it way down, just to 2, right? And we'll turn it up a little bit. Awesome, so that sounds pretty good for that one. Let's go ahead and go to our splits, and we'll go to number 1 for the bass. At a different rate, and now they're gonna be basically wobbling without interfering with each other, but kind of without being in the same time as well too. So kind of a natural, interesting analog style imperfect vibrato. All right, now hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Hopefully you learned a thing or two about analog sound design. I know the patches were pretty basic, but I mean, how good did they sound? Now that's a testament to just how great the third wave is at this virtual analog side. And again, if you haven't seen my full third wave video where I go over the rest of the synth, the wavetable side, the complex multi-timbral side, go check that out now because we're only scratching the surface here. This synth truly is one of, if not the most versatile keyboards I've ever used, and I'm so stoked to be able to share more about it with you guys today. And I've just been using it like crazy. I love this thing. Anyways, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, subscribe, notification bell, all that good stuff. It really does help my channel grow and help me know what kinds of videos to make, and I will see you in the next video.